to your regularly scheduled program.
When your camera is made by Kodak, you know it's good.
Tonight, I'd like to show you one of the world's great cameras.
Tonight, I'd like to show you a new idea in picture taking.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up.
I see the picture in my mind's eye, and I give it to you as the equivalent of what I saw and felt.
We choose to go to the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We will never forget that we are analog human beings.
My job is to be authentic.
We all love stories. We're born for them.
Coming to you live from Stratobox Studios in Manila, Philippines.
Hi guys, we're back. Let's try to wait for some of our friends to join in the class, and we will be starting in a few. Wonder who are with us tonight. Hi Ned. Okay, let's try to wait for some of our regular friends who normally join us to come back. How are you guys tonight? So for tonight, we will be having an online class. We're planning to do this every weekend so that our members would have something, a program to learn about things in photography. And one of those that we will be learning about is from this book from Tom Ang. It's photography, the definitive visual history of photography, and we'll be tackling this book, which I hope you guys have, so that we can learn together. So basically that's it. We'll start with the first chapter, which is the dawn of photography. Are you guys ready? Let's start to greet our viewers. Hi Renz, Ned is here, Hurley is here, mahay na banggi sa gabos. Hardy, hi. Hey. Are you guys ready?
Greetings, loved ones. Let's take
Hi Kristen, you're back. I'll just wait for some of our other friends to join us. Hi Lisa. We will be starting in a bit. again, we will start from chapter 1 of this book by Tom Ang. And we'll start with that. We'll start with the dawn of photography, then move on to my top 10 film cameras, then move on to the top documentaries and movies you guys can watch. Some of the movies or some of the documentaries you can already watch on YouTube for free. Hi guys, are you ready to learn? Again, we will be learning from this book by Tom Ang. It's the definitive visual history of photography. So, if you've been able to grab a copy of this, do grab a copy. It's one of the best books that I have ever read. And I normally base some of the things that I try to blog about from this book. Again, welcome back. Hi Zap. Are you guys ready? Yeah, I believe we can start now. Hold up. Okay, let's start. So for tonight, we'll be discussing about the dawn of photography from Tom Ang's book, The Definitive Visual History of Photography. So if you have a chance to grab the book, do grab them. They're one of the best books that I have ever read. Hey, let's start with the dawn of photography. So again, the dawn of photography begins at 1825 to 1849, and the invention of photography was a triumph of the Industrial Revolution to bend nature to the human will. So it was a time where all the technological marvels started to arrive, and at the same time influence the way humans lived. Okay. And by the 20th century, fire, wind, steam, gas, and electricity had been harnessed for industry, construction, and transportation. It was no accident that the three key photographic discoveries came about in France and Britain as people tried to replicate a task or skill with technology. So it was a time where all of the new technologies were starting to come out and influence the way scientists and people interact. So that was at the beginning of the 20th century, and the three main discoveries in photography were influenced by these three inventors and scientists. So we have Nicephore Niepce, Louis Daguerre, and William Henry Fox Talbot. So do you guys have maybe you guys have an idea who these people are? Meron ba? Meron ba? So again, the pioneers of photography began with the three main inventions or discoveries by these three guys. So it was Nicephore Niepce, Louis Daguerre, and William Henry Fox Talbot. So they were Nicephore Niepce and Louis Daguerre were both French, and William Henry Fox Talbot was British. And I believe we also have another let's try to check out who they are. So we have Nichifor Niepce. He was a French inventor who was the first to make a permanent photographic image. So that's Nichifor Niepce. And then we move on to Louis Daguerre. He was a French artist and a photographer recognized for his invention of the daguerreotype process of photography. And we also have William Henry Fox Talbot. He was an English scientist, inventor, and photography pioneer who invented the salted paper and cyanotype process. So if you've been if you've seen a cyanotype process, William Henry Fox Talbot was one of the main guys who started the idea or the process. Okay, and we have another one actually. This is Sir John Herschel. He was an English polymath, mathematician, astronomer, chemist, inventor, and an experimental photographer who invented the blueprint cyanotype process and did botanical work. So they were in part with Sir Henry Fox Talbot. Okay. So Nichifor Niepce wanted to avoid the labor of hand engraving. So Daguerre was tired of painting large panels for his light shadows, and as well Fox Talbot, on the other hand, was horrified by his inability to draw lakeside scenes that he turned to cyan. So those were their drives why they pursued to discover more about the process and try to find a way to resolve those problems that they were finding hard, that they found hard to work around. And then the rapid spread of photography around the world by 1850, it started by 1850. The rapid discovery of photography around the world began. So in 1850, the studios in India and Hong Kong opened. So that was a time where photography was being discovered by people around the world because the technology was fast. Started to become easily accessible for people. And in 1853, New Zealand girls had their portraits taken due to the vision of the French government. So as you see, people started to become more and more involved into having their photos taken. And while that was taking place, the fine art establishment took an instant dislike to photography. So they found photography as something that would, something that's not or won't coincide with the aesthetics and the way art is made. So they refer to photography as not art, but something that's less of an art. Yeah, so given photography's short history, it is hard surprising that the fine art establishment took an instant dislike for it, whereas other mechanical art process demanded certain levels of skill and craftsmanship. It was only too clear that even people with no artistic skill at all could, if moderately practical, produce photographs of scenes and portraits that were better than finest drawings. So began photography's 100 Years' War with painting, during which it battled to be recognized as an art in its own right on one hand, and to be different as possible from painting on the other. So they were trying to battle it out between which is more art. So again, there was a bit of a clash between traditional painting and photography. Such a debate took place at all reveals a fact that is often overlooked. To be a photographer in the early years, where was I? To be a photographer in the early years, you needed ready access to pure silver, hand-ground lenses, and cabinet-quality cameras, as well as studio and darkroom space. Commissioning a daguerreotype portrait was therefore expensive. Photography was the exclusive preserve of the wealthy. So, by in itself, photography was really expensive because silver in itself is a bit of a what do you call that? It's a luxury. So in itself, photography became very expensive, and only those who had the money to get their pictures taken were the ones who had the daguerreotype pictures. Let's move on to the illustrations. Let me read you some excerpts from the book. The camera obscura was well known by the time of the Chinese philosopher Mozi from 470 to 390 BCE. He charmingly called the unlocked treasure room, presumably because the door had to be kept closed or the image would disappear. So the Chinese philosopher who came by the name Mozi knew about the camera obscura, and he knew that there were you can actually light can actually be refracted to a room to show an image outside the area. And then we move on to this is what I showed you last time with the workshop with Alhazen. So Alhazen was a born scientist. He showed through systematic experiment a procedure 500 years ahead of its time. So what he did was he tried to cover the whole room and tried to create a small hole on the window and try to show the reflection of the mosque to the cloth that was hanging inside the dark room. So again, that was Alhazen, and he actually created a book which was called the Book of Optics. Any questions so far? Can you guys follow, or was I fast? Let's try to go back. So photography in itself began in 470 to 390 BCE in China, where this philosopher Mozi knew about the technology and how it works. And then Alhazen took that idea and tried to experiment, which led him to create the Book of Optics. There. And we go now to unlocking the treasure room. So what remained was photography's central problem: how to keep the image once the door to the camera obscura was open. Anyone who experienced a camera obscura knew how frustrating it was to watch the image dissolve into a pool of pale forms as soon as the light was let in. One vital step was to understand the light was independent to heat. in 1602, Italian chemist Vincenzo Cascariolo created the powder barium sulfide, which glowed in the dark after being exposed to light. With it came the idea of insolation, exposure to light to obtain an image. So the powder barium sulfide, which glowed in the dark, was used by Vincenzo Cascariolo to somehow use it to expose. He discovered that when you expose it, you get a certain effect. So again, experimenting on these lines by Vincenzo Cascariolo led to the experiment by German anatomy professor Johann Heinrich Schulze, discovered in 724 that silver nitrate darkened when exposed to light. But try as he might, he could not make the change permanent. So in 1724, Johann Heinrich Schulze discovered silver nitrate. So when he discovered silver nitrate, the problem was then he couldn't make the change permanent. So when the light was exposed to silver nitrate, it was recorded for a period of time, but the image couldn't be permanent. So he can record it, but it wasn't really permanent. And then the race was on, due to in part to French author Charles François Tiphaine de la Roche, whose novel Gypanti à Babylon 1760 described a mirror that perfectly preserved a scene reflected on it. Notably, de la Roche placed this instrument in a virtuous paradise. Early histories of photography in 1860 would acknowledge his anticipation of the daguerreotype. So, after Heinrich Schulze discovered the silver nitrate, then came the French author François de la Roche, where he described a mirror perfectly preserved. He described a mirror that was perfectly preserved with a scene reflected on it. So, and then, so early histories of photography in 1860s would acknowledge his anticipation for the daguerreotype. So, he was trying to explain the idea of the daguerreotype, where you have a plate that records the image through silver nitrate. Back in the real world, François de la Roche was one of the visionaries of that time who were writing about the future technologies of that time. And then that's why he was acknowledged that indeed his vision was really possible due to the discoveries of earlier scientists. So we go back to the real world. One of the first use of light-sensitive compounds, such as silver nitrate, to fix patterns was chemist Elizabeth Verharn. Her understanding of metal salts, published in 1794, laid foundation. So then came Miss Elizabeth Verharn. What she did was she tried to experiment about metal salts, and then from that she developed the idea of recording light using silver nitrate. Wow, it's really a mouthful. It's really a mouthful. And lots of people behind there were really lots of people behind the discovery and the process of photography. That's why it's really important to actually know about these, because if you don't, you're deemed to forget all the things that they try to do just to show you how photography can be made. And then, can you guys follow? So again, do we go back? Let's try to go back after the whole we call this chapter. And then we move on. So that was the daguerreotype. So the daguerreotype was actually like this. Yeah, that was the daguerreotype, where it's actually just a room where there's a small hole. It was totally dark, and what the scientist or the painter would do is try to trace the image, or try to experiment about the image that gets transferred to the wall that light was reflecting on. So that was the, what do you call that, the camera obscura. And then the daguerreotype was actually the process where the actual image is actually recorded on a plate. I don't have my plate with me. I'll try to show it to you later so that you get an idea of how it works. And then, do we tackle cloudless? No, not anymore. Yeah, so again, it's really a tedious process how they were able to develop photography. Gabi, no? And then we move on to capturing the image. Let me try to fix this gimbal. Ooh. Here. So let's move on. Hold on. I forgot to put audio. Sorry. There. So again, capturing an image, one of the crucial steps in the invention of photography was to fix the image. The first attempts established that photography works negatively, where light strikes the resulting image is dark while shadows are pale. So if you can see it here, this was one of the first samples of a negative where everything was inverted. You could see the highlights and at the same time the shadows, but the problem was they were all inverted. Yeah, and that was actually niche for Nipsey. Let's try to read it. Among many distinguished names who struggled to fix the image of the camera obscura, Nichipor Nipsey was a well-to-do amateur who bested in finest scientific minds of the time. So, Nichipor Nipsey began as a soldier, and then he came home, he became part of the parliament. Then, in 1801, he pursued the research on photography. photography was the cyanotype process that was really pioneered by what's his name? By John Herschel, an English polymath. So what a cyanotype process is, it's a cheap and robust. The cyanotype blueprint process has been in use since its discovery by Sir John Herschel in 1842. He applied a mixture of potassium ferricyanide and ammonium ferricitrate, which is weakly sensitive to light, to paper, and allowed it to dry in the dark on exposure to ultraviolet light, usually from the sun. The salts react to produce ferrocyanide, Prussian blue, a bright blue dye, washing the image in water, remove the unexposed soluble iron salts, leaving the soluble Prussian. I'm not sure if you guys have been able to see the entire process of a cyanotype, but basically it is where you put specific chemicals on it, that are light sensitive, and when you put an object above it or a negative slide above it, it records the image, and you can do that by placing it under the sun to develop the image. So that's called cyanotype. If you want to discover more about the cyanotype process, we will be having workshops here very soon when the lockdown's over. We will be continuing with the workshops, and one of the workshops that we will be introducing is how to do a cyanotype process. I have with me is what they call a cyanotype paper. So this is actually a paper where the solution was painted on. So if you put, for example, leaves on this, it can record the leaves. I just can't get my sample. It's at the back by the dark room, but basically it would look like this. Sorry. Basically it would look like this. There. It would look like that. So why, you might ask why it's actually blue. So it's blue because of the chemicals that were used on it. The chemical is actually the ferrocyanide. So one of the main things about the cyanotype process is it's very if you get in contact with the solution, it depends on how your skin reacts to it, because it's a bit sensitive, especially that the chemicals, one of the components of the chemicals is actually cyanide. So it's pretty deadly to be working with that chemical. So try to be cautious, especially when working with the chemicals. But yeah, if you guys would like to learn more about that, the chemicals and the equipment on how to make cyanotypes are available here in Stratobox. Okay, so we got cut off for a bit. There, we're back. So again, if you can see this was actually one of the first photographs. Nichipor Nipse was actually one of the photographers who made this photograph possible, because he was experimenting with the process of the silver nitrate and the chemicals that he produced to make use of the camera obscura. So what he did was he exposed the image for a period of about 8 hours. So you could imagine how long the recording of this image took place. It was really a long exposure back in the day. Great. And this is actually one of the first daguerreotype interior. This was actually in 1873. Yeah, some 15 of Daguerreo's original images survived. So since this was actually in 1837, not all of Daguerreo's original images were really taken care of and preserved, and also because of the First World War and the Second World War, nobody knows now where some of the images are, but 15 of his original images survive. And even now, their exquisite tonality and detail are surprising. But the physical delicacy of the images, while appealing at first, became tiresomely impractical because it was really expensive to produce images with that. Are you guys still there? Can you follow? Or you need me to do... Are you guys still there? Hello? Okay, so then came the daguerreotype camera. So, Daguerre invented not only photography but also the camera. As all aspects of succeeding cameras, even the format sizes of modern photography, are essentially elaborations of his basic design. So, Daguerre actually is the father of photography. So, if you don't know Daguerre, you're not a photographer. you need to know Daguerre because he was the one responsible for our modern day photography. So what he did was this camera, where it's basically like a large format camera or your basic camera, where you have the lens here, and then the box that looks like that also replicates the camera obscura, and then at the back you have the recorder or the light sensitive material, where you place it there and slam it, then record the light as it passes through. So again, it's very basic. So you have the lens, the camera, and the back. Okay. So the examples are like this. I believe that's actually a family portrait in 1845. So you could see how this is, I believe, colorized. It wasn't really colored, but it was actually colorized. Thus came the Borkin camera in 1845. So it evolved, and like that, people were wanted to have their images taken, because back in the day they thought that, or they had this perception of photography as a magic, because the technology was was ahead of its time, and back in the day, people were just relying on portraits or on paintings that were made by painters, and they didn't really have this actual image that records themselves on it. This is also one of the reasons why there were beliefs that when you take a photo, it captures a person's soul. So this is actually one of the reasons for that, because people back in the day found it as something out of this world. It was something. They couldn't actually explain if it was the first time they saw it. It was really magical, and that's one of the reasons why they think back in the day that when you take a photo, it captures the person's soul. Did you guys get that? Hi, Kuya Joms. Again, if you're just tuning in, we are discussing the dawn of photography and how photography evolved through time, and some of the discoveries that were discovered by the scientists and the inventors who are really one of the fathers of our modern day photography. Let's go now to this. This is actually Boulevard du Temple, Paris. It was made by Louis Jacques Mande de Guerre. It was actually Louis de Guerre again. It's actually the first living, or actually the first photo of a person, or a street photo. This was in 1838. This was actually the first ever portrait of a person. It's pretty technical. The book actually explains how technical it is, and one of the different things about the photo. So again, if you have the time to get this book, it's really good. Okay, let's move on to Henry Fox Talbot. So, like many early pioneers in photography, Talbot, as he liked to be known, came from a privileged background. Thanks to his brilliant polyglot mother, who turned her late husband's estate around from debt-ridden to prospering estate around. Turned her late husband's estate around from debt-ridden to prospering. Talbot enjoyed education at Harrow and Trinity College, Cambridge, with an income that allowed him to research and travel to Europe. Today, he would be described as a nerd. So, Henry Talbot was actually a nerd back in the day. He's somewhat can be probably he might probably be similar to Bill Gates back in the day. So, painfully shy, with interests ranging from mathematics to Greek verse, astronomy, and chemistry. So he was very interested in those. His life-changing moment revealed his competitive streak, while other members of the family produced pleasing sketches of Lake Como in Italy, where they vacationed in 1833. His attempts were very sorry. So people he didn't actually like what he painted or what he drew. So this is one of the reasons why he pursued to find ways how to record an image based on the previous technologies or the previous discoveries in his time. So from Nietzsche por Nipse to Luis Daguerre, to Henry Fox, to John Herschel. He turned all those into his new thing. So what he was actually famous of is what you call, where is that? Hold on, he's actually famous for his own technique. That's weird. I can't seem to find it. So anyway, back in the day, one of the lenses that they have is what you call a Petzval lens. This is actually, hold on, not sure why. Let's turn this on. There. This is actually a Petzval lens. Lomography actually produces Petzval lens today. So if you're into that output, you can get a Petzval lens from Lomography. So a Petzval lens is one of the early types of lenses. And back in the day, holding a pose like this, like that, and like that, it had to take a very long exposure. So since the lenses weren't that didn't have those wide apertures, what the photographers needed to do was try to make the model or the people they were taking photos of still. So one of the things that they did was to create a metal holder for the what do you call it, for the throat of the model, so that the model will be still while the photo is being taken. So this is how it looks. So back in the day, that's how they did it. And this is actually one of the samples of that. This is Dorothy Catherine Draper. This was in 1839. This is actually the first female portrait. Sure, there. Dorothy Catherine Draper, this actual photo is the first female portrait. So a few trivia about this. The sitter, his sister, she's actually John Draper took the photo. Dorothy Catherine Draper is actually his sister. He did powder her face to lighten the skin tones. So aside from being a photographer, John Draper, who was the photographer, was actually the makeup artist of Catherine Draper. Oh. Hi, Louise. Again, if you're just tuning in, we're almost done. We're doing a quick class for the dawn of photography. We'll try to do a recap of all the things that we discussed. So I don't think we need to discuss this further, but here are some of the examples of the evolutions of photography. And like that. And we're done. So that's actually the first part. Let's put this here. So that's actually the first part. So going back, photography began. Hold on, what happened? Going back, photography began as an idea from this Chinese philosopher named Mozi. He had an idea, or he knew that light can be refracted through a hole to enter a room that's dark, so that you can project the image on the wall. And then that was from there. Al Hazen, who was in Iraq, tried to record that and try to experiment more on that, and then came what's his name, Nichipor Nipse, who was really the pioneer of in terms of the chemicals and the way or how light can be recorded using silver nitrate. And then from Nichipor Nipse, then came Luis Daguerre, who created the actual camera, where it had a lens, the camera body, and at the back, where the recording material or the slides or the glass plates are placed. And then we also have John Herschel and what's his name, Henry Fox Talbot, who each did their own processes, where John Herschel was the pioneer of the cyanotype process, where it was actually easier to record without having an actual camera. And then Henry Fox Talbot with his own process of recording the light with his own type of material and chemicals. And there we have it. That's actually the first part. We'll try to move on with the second part maybe next week. So before we close the class, maybe you guys have any questions about the process. Sorry. Maybe you guys have any questions about how it began or how the process turned out to be. Any questions? Come on, guys. Any questions?
Greetings, loved ones. Let's take a journey.
Any questions? Hello. Renz, maybe you have a question. Or Rambert, or who else is watching? Adrian, maybe you have a question. Ned, maybe you have a question. None? Let's move on. Are you good? Are we good? Okay. So again, hold on, let me change the music. Lisa, maybe Lisa is still here. Ah, Josh, there we have it. Wait, we have a question from Josh. So Josh is asking, is the daguerreotype easy to do? It's actually hard when you do the daguerreotype, because you need to have access to silver, pure silver, to work on it. So having access to pure silver is in itself expensive, and it's also hard to procure silver, and especially silver nitrate, to produce that. Today it's easier if you get film, or get a roll of film or a slide to do the process, other than using silver nitrate to do it, because in itself it's not that practical to do nowadays. But there are actually people who still do this. Go ahead, Renz, what's your question? The name of the book. This is actually Photography, the Definitive Visual History by Tom Ang. You can get this, I believe Book Sale has some copies, I believe, but this copy, I got this from Big Bad Wolf 2 years ago. Not sure if you can get a copy of this online or an ebook. Not sure if they have. Maybe you can try to search. But I prefer, if you'd ask me, I prefer a physical book so that you can actually see it physically and you get to really dive into the information on it. Any other questions before we move on to the next? No other questions? Miles is here. Hi, Miles. How's Ateneo? Are we good? Let's move on to the next. Are we good? Again, if you guys would like to discover how the cyanotype process works, we will be opening a workshop for it here at Stratobox. So we are fortunate enough to been given learning materials for the cyanotype process, and in this pouch is actually cyanotype paper. We'll work with this as soon as the lockdown is over. Any other questions before we move on to the next part? So again, the dawn, photography in itself is more than 100 years perhaps, and with the technology evolves, with how the technology evolves from now to 5 years from now, it makes it not sure if that's an advantage. For me, I still prefer film because in itself you do it organically, how people did it back in the day. Are we good? Let's move on to the next. So again, that was the dawn of photography, and next week we will try to cover more things from this book, the Definitive Visual History by Tom Ang. We'll try to read about and try to learn together all the history of photography. And I believe the next part, let's try to check the next part, what the next part is. So from the dawn of photography, our next chapter will move on to the gathering momentum. So this is more on how people applied the new technology, which is film, or because this was a time where since the technology is easily accessible to everyone, people began to make use of it and try to find new ways of dealing with the new technology, and we'll discuss more about that. And some of the things that we have here is how they used it to take photos of the architectural marvels back in the day, and you'll be able to see all the photos here of Egypt, how it looked before the World War happened, and yeah. So we'll discuss more about that, and also how people, because most of the photos that were taken back in the day were black and white, and how Felice Beato tried to experiment and tried to paint on the black and white images, making them colored. So that sparked the idea of people exploring the possibilities of having colored film. So it started with Felice Beato painting on the black and white photos. And then in 1850, they made the first 3D camera. Okay, we'll discuss more about that next week. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.